Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How very nice to see you. Of course, last night was the National Theatre's 50th birthday. We had Her Majesty the Queen here. We had, of course, Warhorse. We had Lady Olivier popped in. So I'm really sorry that the day after that I could only rustle up Alan Bennett and Frances. I'm so sorry. So some of you maybe have been following this sort of parlour game we're playing for the 50th, which is a sort of National Theatre concrete desert island discs, and we will be asking the same. We've been asking the same 10 questions to a variety of characters from the National Theatre, and today we have Mr. Latour and Mr. Bennett. So we start, if we will, Alan, at the beginning. I would like to know about your first ever encounter with the National Theatre.
Well, with this building, or with the when it was at the. I used to go to the in the 60s. Before I had. My first play was in 1968, and I think in the earlier 60s I used to go to the Old Vic, and I saw hay fever, and I remember thinking I'd never seen Maggie Smith until then, and she has a line in it. This haddock is disgusting. Which is, I mean, it's a nice line, but it's not the wittiest line in the world, but it was hysterical. And I thought that was wonderful. And I saw Othello with Olivier and Maggie Smith, Beau Stratagem, and some of the plays where she was with her then husband, Robert Stevens. And it was a very friendly place. I remember it was painted black. I don't know whether it's painted black now, but I remember for some reason that impressed me a great deal, as it being a serious place to be, really. And then the first time I came here was in 1987, when Patrick Garland, who alas was not long died, he put together a programme about Philip Larkin, and which he did with Alan Bates, called Down Cemetery Road. And Alan couldn't do it for 2 or 3 nights, and so I substituted for him. But the audience were not told that Alan Bates wasn't going to appear. So I think a lot of the people came along thinking they were going to see the same actor who they'd last seen wrestling naked on a rug with Oliver Reed. And they must have felt I'd gone down in the world rather since But anyway, and that was the first time. That was in the Cottesloe, and so that was the first time I was in the building.
And then Single Spies was your first.
Yeah, my first play was Single Spies, which was 2 plays, An Englishman Abroad, which started off as a television play, and A Question of Attribution. The Question of Attribution was a play about Anthony Blunt and the Queen, and the main scene in it, and the best thing in it really, is a scene in which the Blunt encounters the Queen in a gallery in Buckingham Palace as he's hanging a picture. And the whole scene is between him and the Queen was played by Prunella Scales. And she was uncannily like the Queen. I know people's image of the Queen now is Helen Mirren. Well, Helen Mirren, I mean, lovely though Helen Mirren is, she is not the Queen. But Prunella Scales, I used to look at her before we went on stage, and you think, well, you don't really look like the Queen. And then we stepped onto the stage, and she became the Queen. It was, and I used to look at her and think, well, why is the Queen different from this? You're so exactly the same. And the voice was the same, and her height was the same. Everything about her was so uncannily like the Queen. So that I think the first 2 or 3 times before it had got around what the play was about, when she stepped onto the stage, there was a stunned silence from the audience. It is to do with the theatre, because although it was filmed, and it was nicely filmed by John Schlesinger, it's not the same as the performance on stage. It was magical, really.
Frankie, so at the Old Vic, you were watching much of the same
Well,
stuff?
yes, indeed. It was about that time. I was about 17, I think, 16, 17, 18. I just started drama school, and one of the first things I saw, and I don't know quite which order it came in, but it would have been Othello. I was quite near in the stalls and utterly amazed and didn't know that actors could do such things. And I mean, I was just riveted by that. And also Maggie in Much Ado with Robert Stevens and The Master Builder, again, the two of them, and Olivier, and then I think after that Michael Redgrave took it over. It was an astonishing time, and I was very lucky to be so young and just going to drama school and coming to the National Theatre, the old National Theatre, the Old Vic, and seeing those amazing shows.
A lot of our guests have said they were up at the top in the cheap seats. Was that true?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all we could afford. And I think they were 10 and 6, which would be about 50p.
Marvellous.
And then in matinee, we used to go in matinees a lot, and we were given tea. We could take our tea in and they were cups and saucers. It was china cups and saucers. I mean, it was absolutely wonderful.
And then your first time performing for the National Theatre was actually in this very room?
It was here. It was so daunting. Ron Eyre, not Richard, Ron, asked me to do St. Joan. I actually think there was a gap in the repertoire. And Ron said, there's a gap. So I said, oh, let's do St. Joan. And luckily, Peter Hall went, oh, okay. I don't think that's what he had planned at all, but we did it, and I found it quite hard, really, to begin with, because of it being in the semi-round. But it is a wonderful space, and but you do have to take in everybody, obviously. And yeah, that was it, St. Joan.
And brilliantly, Fiona Shaw's first memory is being at the back of the circle in the cheap seats watching your St. Joan, which she shared with us, yes, on Monday.
That's so nice.
So it all comes together so beautifully,
We're
this
a very
project.
small group, really,
Absolutely.
aren't we?
The next thing we'd like to talk about, we're going to talk about some people. We'll talk about unsung heroes off the stage. Alan, who have you selected as your unsung heroes of the National Theatre?
Michael Bryant.
Absolutely, on stage, of course.
Who was in Wind in the Willows, playing Boucher, and that was the only time I worked with him. But in all the things I've done since then, there's something he could have done. So, you know, I always feel that I missed out. He was quite scary. I once worked with him on television in Merry Wives of Windsor, and every time I had to rehearse a scene with him, I forgot my words. He somehow could unnerve you, but he was the sweetest man. But he was here for years and years and years and did everything. And because he did everything, he was underrated. I think he eventually got a CBE, but he was just a marvellous actor who could turn his hand to anything, and wasn't at first sight funny, and then you found he could also be wonderfly grotesquely funny as well. And he was in Wind in the Willows. He was with Richard Briers, and the pair of them were it was slightly an act that they did, the pair of them, but they played at being old-fashioned actors, really, and slightly took the piss out of Nick as being a young university director, and Michael Bryant, his widow Judy Cook, after he died, said he always referred to me as College Bennett, but not to my face. I wouldn't have minded, but he was lovely, and Alex Jennings told me that there is a spot on the Olivier stage called the Bryant spot.
I think Frankie's got it.
Yes, where if you stand on it, you command the house.
And I should add that his ashes are actually interred in that spot.
Really?
His ashes were divided between all 3 theatres. There's a little bit at the side of the Littleton stage as you go on it. Somewhere else in the Cots, I'm not sure, and in the Bryant spot in the Olivier.
And there's only 2 actors who have a brass plaque on the dressing rooms here. The rest of us are just, old actors. But there's Dennis Quilly, I think, and Michael Brand, and it's lovely.
Yes,
actually.
there's Basil Henson as well.
Oh, in Basil Henson.
Yeah, that's lovely. And of course, Bryant was such a brilliant company man for all of us. I remember being an usher out there, and he heard I was applying for drama school, and from the stage said, right, in my dressing room between shows, we'll go through your pieces. And I had to do it. And it was brilliant. I mean, how wonderful, how lucky. And you have a second offstage choice, Alan, for your unsung hero.
Neve Dilworth, Nick's secretary, or PA really, she's not his secretary. Neve Dilworth, who is wonderful, because Nick likes gossip, but not as much as I do. And I ring up and Neve tells me all the gossip and everything that's going on. And like, for instance, I knew all about when the Queen came yesterday. And she's also very, very good at sensing what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And so I have a lot of time for Neve. And she's a great friend.
Frankie, you've off-stage choices for you.
Well, apart from your good self.
Thank you.
Seriously.
About time.
This is creeping. Yeah.
I mean, this man, what he's arranged here, all the platform performances, he's done so much. He's been here 30 years. He is the National Theatre, really.
Many of us. Thank you. And
the dressers, particularly, I mean, the dressers they get you on stage. They are so important. I mean, obviously the crew, everybody, but the dressers, they're in your room, they know what's going on in your head. If you've forgotten something, they're completely there, and they really get you on. And the lovely dresser I've used recently, or over several years, is Elise. And she and her mate, who does all the men, Ralph, and they are absolutely astonishing. And I remember once in the West End, an impresario said, they were trying to cut corners, putting on a play, and said, well, you don't need a dresser, do you? I mean, you dress yourself in the morning. And I thought, this man has absolutely no idea. He's been in the business 30 years, whatever. And I went, you don't know what dressers do you? I mean, they take care of your clothes, they make sure every button is on and everything. I said, you have no idea. And I said, well, I could get the stage doorman to dress me. But no, Elise.
great.
Could I say, Ralph, who dressed me when I was here, and was Richard Griffith's dresser. He's very, very discreet, but I felt that when Richard died, he would be the person that people should have talked to about Richard and about what he was like, and he would have known him better, really, than anybody else. Because he, Richard being the size he was, he's just the ordinary things of life were a problem for him. I mean, even getting him on the stage was to begin with, wasn't it? Was quite hard. He was breathless for the first 3 or 4 minutes, and you had to wait. But Ralph would have known all about that, he is exactly as Frankie said. He's discreet and helpful in ways that you almost took for granted.
Exactly.
Moving back on stage, individual performances that have stayed with you, that have remained with you. You've got quite a wide selection, Alan, which is fine. We've mentioned Prue Scales already, which was an extraordinary performance. You've also David Tennant in The Pillow Man.
Oh yes, that's right. The Pillow Man totally took me by surprise. I think it was the first, hadn't seen a play by Martin McDonagh, so the play was extraordinary. And he and Jim Broadbent were terrific. And I'd never seen him before, and I think he was relatively unknown at that time. I don't know, it was just an extraordinary afternoon. And I don't go to the theatre all that much, really. And so I think probably plays have more of an effect on me than they do on somebody who's a much more hardened theatre goer. But I haven't seen him in anything else. So all I see him now, I'm afraid, is in his adverts for Richard Branson. But the less said about that, the better. No, he's terrific.
You also chose a very important performance to you, Nigel Hawthorne as George III.
Oh, that's right. So Nigel Hawthorne as George III. To my shame, when Nick suggested him to me, I hadn't seen him in Shadowlands, in the play about C.S. Lewis, and so I had no idea. All I knew about him was he's in Yes Minister. And I didn't think he had the power really, or the temperament for it. And Nick said, yes, no, he has. Trust me, and he was so right. And Nigel was. What was wonderful about it, I was at every rehearsal, and just seeing him gradually build it up and turn into George III, really, without any of the. Some actors are tiresome about being in life what they're doing on the stage. There was none of that with Nigel, but he really did become George III, and to the extent that some of the actors in the company said that he did start to talk like that in life, and I think there was an award ceremony where somebody, I can't remember who, misbehaved, and Nigel was up for an award, said, "My dear madam," and it was just George III all over again. But he was terrific. But it's boring just saying how good they were, because I wish there'd been the broadcast that they have now of plays, because I'd have loved to have seen that permanently kept.
It's great we have it on film at least, but I know it's not the same. It was also, I mean, technically that whole arc of that performance I used to find extraordinary to watch night after night, of just seeing him come out at the beginning and knowing where he had to go and go back from and go back to again. I mean, you wrote an extraordinarily demanding role there.
But I had no idea. You see, you write it, but you have no idea what it is, and they show you what it is. That's what actors do, you know. And when you go along to the first reading, you've no idea really what you're going to see. And I remember the first reading of George III, thinking, oh well, maybe it's all right. I don't know. Simon Russell Beale read Charles James Fox, and he said, oh, it's very, very good, and I was very encouraged by that. But otherwise, the first reading is often quite depressing. The History Boys' first reading was quite depressing.
It was, wasn't it? Yes.
You have to be used to it and to get beyond that. Well, no, it's true, though.
No, it's true. I don't think we knew what we were talking about.
Yes, that's right.
Frankie, your great performances, they both go back to the old Vic, the ones you've cited.
I'm sorry things go back. I think it's because, when you're younger, you're at such an impressionable age, and also if you want to be an actor. So I'll never forget Joan Plowright doing St. Joan. I mean, it was really so moving, and it's difficult to find the words. She was it. And it's not an easy play, because I had a stab at it. Shaw is very difficult to do. And he's not an actor's playwright, if you know what I mean. And a lot of it was all the wars and the discussions, and you kind of just wait to do the speech at the end, because that's when you're a human being. But it's a very, very long journey. And so you think, is it going to be something, that's going to completely enlighten you? And what happens is she just goes completely real about this woman who just believed what she believed, and fear of imprisonment. And anyway, brilliant.
So you're watching it aged 18 or something.
Yes.
Did you think one day at the National Theatre I should be St. Joan?
I think at that age I thought I should be everything. I remember seeing well, just everything I ever saw, I went, no, I should be, including the male parts.
Fair enough. you played Hamlet.
I played, but I remember seeing Marlon, nothing to do with the National Theatre, but Marlon Brando in, although he'd be good here, but Marlon Brando in, when he was very young, on film, and I just thought, I want to be him. As well as be held by him.
Of course.
I wanted to be him because I saw such freedom in the acting, which of course is what we're talking about when we're talking about great performances.
Absolutely.
Like Schofield's Lear, I'm sorry it wasn't here, it was another theatre, but it was, there are just some performances that you think, oh
well, you
my
also
God.
cited Joan's husband, Larry, as Othello.
And, of course, yes, Othello, because, well, it was just astonishing. This actor had achieved things that I think perhaps no other actor has. Or maybe they did in the way old days, but he was such a showman. And so he could, it's interesting, he didn't reveal a lot of what was going on inside, but he revealed the person who was in charge, and in a way that was just brilliant. I think he was almost a musician. It was like he played an instrument for the audience. And, well, I mean, people now, of course, would be maybe critical because it was an actor blacking up, which, of course, they did then. And because he did it more as a... it was just his interpretation. He had all the jewels and the bangles and the...
He had the walk as well.
And he had the walk, and that walk was amazing. So I don't know if this has anything to do with Lear, Othello, but it's absolutely, sort of keeping us in our seats.
I can remember him in Long Day's Journey.
Oh, yeah.
When he was, famously, he started getting stage fright later on in his career. And I think I was about the fifth row, and he, at one point, he stands on the edge of a table to change a light bulb, and you could see him trembling, not as the character, but as himself, and that was quite, moving and also scary.
I think that's when you really saw his greatness, funnily enough, because he had to overcome that. And I think to overcome that is amazing.
The next question is, I can ask you both at the same time, and you can give your answer both at the same time, about the most fulfilling production you've worked on at the National Theatre.
Most?
Fulfilling.
Fulfilling.
The History Boys.
Yeah. Well, we had such a good time.
I know.
Why. I mean, it gets boring saying what a good time we had, but we did have such a good time. And without seeming, the only difficulty ever was whether Richard would learn his words in time.
Yes.
That was, which he was famous for not, he was famous for really keeping it till the last minute, because he was the same on The Habit of Art. But that was the only thing. Other than that, it was, and I never remember thinking, is this play going to be a success or not? You somehow weren't bothered about that, really.
No, it gelled, didn't it?
Yeah.
And the way that, it was a wonderful play. And the way that Nick did and the design, that you had the video and then the walls moved in that rather wonderful way. And it was sort of...
And it was like, for me anyway, it was like a holiday, really, a holiday from writing. I think for Nick it was a holiday as well, because he used to, he had all sorts on his plate and all the productions and all the problems. But you never had any sense of that in the rehearsal room, that, once he was in rehearsal,
there wasn't tension.
He was wholly concerned with that, and it was, it was a joy, really.
And what was lovely too is that the boys didn't know a lot.
No.
They hadn't been that educated, because our education system isn't particularly good. And they didn't know what the boys knew in the play or what the boys were asking. So there were all these books everywhere in the rehearsal room and all these tables. And if they wanted to read about the Reformation or anything to do with the things we were talking about, they would go, and they were sort of avidly getting involved with what was that wonderful thing? Was it somebody said, about the World War.
Oh, that's
what was
right.
it?
Yeah, no, Russell Tovey, now, you know,
Hugely famous.
famous, but he said it had never occurred to him that if there'd been a World War II, that there'd also been a World War I. He's not stupid, Russell.
No, he just didn't know there was a World War
It just had
I.
never occurred to him. The other thing about him, and it's a much more abstruse point, but there's a lot about Henry VIII and the Reformation in the play. And he knew nothing about this, but he knew in very great detail about the ceremonies, the Catholic ceremonies, which were swept away at the Reformation. And the reason why he knew this, and it's a very actorish thing, this, he knew about that because he'd worked on a project with another director where they were going to do a short play about it, and it hadn't come to anything. But it's the way actors have areas of specialised knowledge just to do with the players that they've been in, and they don't have the whole picture. They just have that.
That is so true, because we either weren't that well educated, or we left school before A levels then, or we didn't go to university, or whatever, went to drama school. So everything that we learnt from plays. It is true. So it's very selective information.
Had you two worked together prior to the History Boys?
No.
We didn't.
The first time I saw Frankie was again in a place we mustn't mention.
Yes.
In Midsummer Night's Dream, where she was seemingly weightless. That's what I remember. On a drum.
Yeah.
Is that right? And they really clouted each other, the two girls.
Yes, we really went for each other.
Yeah, and that was. I had no expectations when I went in again, and it was just wonderful.
I was terrified of Mary Rutherford, who played Hermia, because she really would go for me.
Yeah.
This is a play.
And did you always want Frankie to play the teacher?
Yes,
in that?
she. When I was writing the play. I wrote in the script, which I sent to Nick, just a penciled note, this would be nice for Frankie Latour. And Frankie was in the Middle East somewhere, weren't you?
No, I was in in Australia.
It's close.
Close. And there was all sorts of boards going up all over the place for the Talking Heads revival. Production was going on with Maggie Smith and Maggie Tyzack, and I thought, this wasn't that long ago, obviously. I said to myself, I've never been in an Alan Bennett play. I'm really annoyed, and I'm upset. I'd love to have been in an Alan Bennett play. And then I got back to the hotel, no kidding, and there was a script waiting for me. Said Mrs. Lintott in The History Boys, and I just said yes. Yes. And then,
It all worked out.
It all
rather
worked
well.
out.
But I can remember seeing you in a play called Wheelchair Willie at the Royal Court.
Yes. That was strange.
Which I really liked it, this play, and it was a kind of releasing play. It made you think you could do anything on the stage. I'm so hidebound and so traditional in my approach. To be suddenly shown that you can do anything is a revelation to me. But anyway, at the end of this play, the boy in the wheelchair goes up. I don't think he goes up into heaven, but he certainly goes up and all lights and goes up and disappears into the flies. And years later, I remembered that for the production of The Lady in the Van that we did with Maggie Smith, and where her van goes up into the flies in the same way, and that comes from Wheelchair Willie.
The productions of the National Theatre that got away, what you missed that you would like to see. Alan, your answer says most of them, which is very helpful, because you don't go to the theatre very much. Why is that?
Well, I don't go to the theatre, really, because I'm so timid, but it's partly, if I go and like a thing very, very much, I come away depressed because I think I couldn't do as well myself. And if I go and find I don't like it, I come away depressed because I think I could do much better. can't win, really. But I think that's quite common with writers, really. I think it's true of novels as well.
You did say you didn't see Guys and Dolls, though. You missed Guys and Dolls.
No, I would like to have seen Guys and Dolls, yes. No.
Oh, he's one. Frankie, what did you miss?
I missed Amadeus. And later I saw on a clip, I don't know if it was television or what, but I saw a clip of Paul Scofield doing Salieri and describing what it was to listen to Mozart. And I thought, oh my God, this is such an astonishing performance. I'm really, really sorry I missed that. There's never an excuse. There's a reason, but never an excuse. And the other was Nick Heitner's Carousel. I don't really like musicals, but then there are some I like, and that I heard so many wonderful things about it. So I'm sorry I missed those.
Now, the most popular question we wrote for this, fancy dress party, you've got to wear one National Theatre costume. Alan Bennett, what will you be wearing to that?
I should stay at home.
Frankie and I decided we would drag you, kicking and screaming to the party, dressed as Mole from Wind in the Willows.
Mole, what happened with Mole is that they dressed as me.
We were right, Frankie.
David Bamber, without permission, I mean, David Bamber, when we were rehearsing, I began to notice that his voice was slightly altering. And then he gradually started putting on bits of costume. And I realised he was doing it as me, and of course I couldn't really complain, but I never thought of it as me. But anyway, and that's the way it's been done since, I think. It's been established.
So we've left Bennett at home. We're going to the party. Frankie,
Yes.
what are you dressing as, more sensibly?
Well, I wanted to come as Trevor Nunn. But Angus said, no, you've misunderstood the question. I said, well, I wanted to come because then I could hug everybody, because he does. And,
So do you.
And I could wear a lovely black, shiny wig. And he went, no, Frank, you completely misunderstood the question. You have to come as somebody in a play. So then I got quite serious and said, well, I quite like that chainmail I wore in St. Joan. And particularly because the armoury department, wonderful people working there. Don't know if we have an armoury department anymore.
Oh, we do, yes, we do.
They, lovely guy there said, well, why don't you use this sword? It's the sword that Laurence Olivier used when he played Henry V. And I went, right. So I held this sword. Anyway, I held the sword and did St. Joan. So I would say, come as St. Joan with the sword and throw my weight around.
And we'll tempt Alan along.
And we'll say, Mole, come here.
Surely you want to see David Hare dressed as Kate Nelligan, because that was his choice.
No, really?
Hello, yes, cocktail dress from Plenty. So, yeah, bizarre. Now, favourite place at the National Theatre? So, Alan.
Well, in all this building, there are about 3 loos that I can use, which are wholly private. And those are, and I'm not going to say where they are because I don't want anybody to use them. And that occurs in Habit of Art. I wrote it into the play, but it's heartfelt. There are never enough loos in a place for me, but there are about 3 in this building. So.
That's a good ratio. And Frankie, where's your actually quite secret place?
It is quite secret, but it's quite open as well. It's at the very top terrace outside the Ashcroft room, I think.
Yeah.
And it's sort of cordoned off because it's very often for people, that particular part of the terrace, for people who have private dues up there or whatever, or for a special occasion. So it's cordoned off. But my dear, loving, beautiful friend Maggie Tyzak told me about this place, and she went there to learn her lines and be quiet. So she undid the rope thing and sat there, and I've been doing the same thing. And when the staff come up to us and say, excuse me, what are you doing here? This is not for the general public. I said, no, I'm just learning lines. And anyway, thank you, goodbye. And normally we don't get thrown out, but it's quiet and it's nice and it's open, and you realise, you know, what a great space this is, really, from that point of view.
And did you hang out there with Maggie Tyser?
I did.
So
Yes, we did. We discussed everything.
Mm-hmm.
She's one of those dear friends you could talk to, a bit like Alan, really. You could talk to him about anything.
Toilets, clearly.
Toilets, anything.
She was the most, she was an inveterate sender of postcards.
Yes.
And when she and Maggie Smith were doing a tour of Talking Heads in the Far East, they were on the plane, and Maggie swears that, and they were both in the same row, Maggie swears that she had 3 postcards from Maggie Tyser in the course of the journey.
Brilliant.
As our final thing, we offer you your chance on this concrete desert island to programme your dream day of entertainment here on the South Bank. A morning show, an afternoon performance, a matinee, and an evening show. So, Alan, I wonder if you could tell us how we would begin in the morning for you.
Morning, I'd like to see Wind in the Willows again, exactly as it was done.
Original cast.
With the original cast and the original staging and everything about it. It's just, I loved that.
And that was your first collaboration with Nick?
Yes. I mean, I don't. He had Richard Eyre was the director then, and I should say about Richard, he was so generous about. I'd worked with him before, and I'd done plays with him and television plays, and then I started working with Nick, and Richard Eyre was so generous about this, and entitled to feel a bit disgruntled, but never gave any hint of it. So that should be said. But anyway, Nick said to him he'd like to do Wind in the Willows, and Richard said, "Who do you want to adapt it?" And he suggested me. So I'm so grateful for that, because that's how I started working with him.
You'd read it on the radio rather famously by that point.
Yes, I'd done things with it, but I'd know. I'd tried to adapt it earlier with a script which would involve Kenneth Grahame's life as well as The Wind in the Willows. But if you know anything about Kenneth Grahame, his life was tragic. He longed to go to university, go to Oxford, and he couldn't go to Oxford. There wasn't enough money, and he worked in the Bank of England, where he did very well in the Bank of England. I think he became secretary of the Bank of England, and then started to write. And then he married, and they had one son who was handicapped, and Kenneth Grahame then did what fathers often do, parents often do, is lived out in the children his own ambition. So he sent his son to Oxford, where he was very unhappy, and the son eventually lay down on the railway line across Port Meadow in Oxford and committed suicide. And I couldn't see how you could meld this terrible story in with Wind in the Willows. So I said, I couldn't do it. And then Nick said, well, we just want to do the Wind in the Willows, not about Kenneth Grahame's life. So that's how it came about.
So after Wind in the Willows, our matinee from you, Alan, will be...
Now,
this is clever.
I've forgotten what I did. Did I Prunella Scales?
You put a question of attribution.
In a question of attribution.
And then Browning version is the other
I don't want
half.
to be in the question of attribution.
Okay.
I was in it, but I don't want. I'd rather see. I think Edward Petherbridge did a lovely performance on radio, and I'd love to see him do it. But anyway.
And also Browning version is the other half of the double bill.
Yes, and I've never seen Browning version here. I saw Browning version when I was a boy in Leeds, and I thought it was a wonderful play. And Paul Eddington did it. I think that's the only time I've seen it. But.
And here Alec McCown and Geraldine McEwen did it with Harlequinade in the Littleton very early on, which was pretty extraordinary performance. So you can have that one.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, very Roy Plumley here. And finally, after our evening...
evening would be Maggie Smith in Hay Fever.
playing Myra,
Yes.
talking about Haddock.
Yeah, talking about it with, now let me think of the rest of the cast. Well, I saw Edith Evans in it. I mean,
Yes.
when, you know, she didn't play a lot of performances, I think. I think Celia Johnson replaced her. But Edith Evans used to drive Noel Coward up the wall because she had a rather cavalier attitude to the text. And there's a line where she's talking about the house. She said, on a very clear day, you can see Marlowe. And the line, this wasn't the line, and he stuck with this for a bit, and he said, Edith, the line is, on a clear day, you can see Marlowe. On a very clear day, you can see Marlowe and Beaumont and Fletcher.
Frankie, your morning.
My morning is No Man's Land.
Yes, you've been clever here. So, Act 1 of No Man's Land.
Act 1, I'd like to see what I saw was Ralph Richardson and John Gielgud in Pinter's No Man's Land. They were both exemplary and kind of out of their comfort zone. It was extraordinary. And also, I did love John Wood and Corin Redgrave in the play, and my brother, who was also in the play, Andy. And I would like those actors to do Act 2. So we've got lots of actors there.
Pretty good lineup.
And then in the matinee, I'd like Maggie Smith and Robert Stevens and all the original cast of Bro Stratagem.
Also Ronnie Pickup.
And Ronnie
David
Pickup, who I've
Ryle.
worked with, is lovely, and you know, really lovely cast.
An exemplary comic performance by all accounts. So
Yes.
Maggie's doing well from both of you.
Maggie's doing so. She was so hysterically funny, so beautiful, and of course her timing and everything. Lovely afternoon. And in the evening, I would like a platform performance.
Thank you very much.
of Peter Brook talking about the theatre, acting, and actors. He understands so completely. I sound very biased, but he is amazing.
And you, I remember you were here the very last time he did a platform here.
Oh, I was riveted.
Yeah.
I mean, it was...
Aren't you scared of him?
No, because I worked with him when I
No.
was very young.
No.
And I was very fortunate, of course. But difficult to follow that, of course. I was 25, 26, in the Midsummer Night's Dream. And he was... Everybody said, oh, no, he's scary, and he's going to tell everybody what to do. He's really one of those tough... Not at all. Not at all. All came from everything came from the actors. And then he'd gather together what we'd all tried to do. And he'd say, well, what do you mean by that? And let's do it. I remember at one point saying, but there's no love. I'm sorry, but there's no love in this rehearsal room. Meaning in the forest or the Midsummer Night's Dream. I said, I don't know what would... He said, but isn't that exactly what Helena feels? Anyway, they were very clever answers. I was very young. And the other thing was that he said, I said, I don't know how to do rhyming couplets because it's very difficult. Everything's in a rhyming couplet. And he said, but aren't you, isn't it brilliant that every time somebody asks you a question, you answer in a rhyming couplet? Well, I thought it was a very good note. Because then you go da 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 da, and then you're not frightened of the couplet. But anyway, there's no point in me talking anymore about him because he himself talks about the theatre and acting and what it means to act in ways that actors can't talk about. He's also wonderful in his respect and love and criticism and just all-round embracing of actors themselves. And when he was talking, some of you may have seen that platform. Somebody asked, I thought with a little hostility, but a little critical question, which they had every right to feel critical about if they wanted to. They said, are you saying that actors are special? And there was a long pause, and in his own way, wonderful way, he answered, he said, they're not special, they're people. what they do is special.
Two very special days, I think, that you have
I
programmed
mean, he
for
would
us.
explain it better, then you'd really love it.
Thank you both so very much. Now, this series is rapidly coming to a conclusion. Richard Eyre is on tomorrow with Julie Walters, and then we conclude with Simon Russell Beale and Brenda Blethyn. But please join me in thanking Alan Bennett and Frances.